Hello, everyone. I hope that you can hear me. We had a little bit of technical difficulty, so bear with us just 1 second. But thank you so much for joining us for another Pelotonia Live. We are so excited. We've got a great group here today, and I'm going to add our speakers back in here. And let's see. All right, so we got accepted and connecting. Hope everyone's having a wonderful Wednesday. My name's Simone, and I'm here for tech support. Thank goodness. So we're going to get ourselves through this. So I'm going to add Siraj back in here, and we'll get Jeremy as well for an awesome presentation. So Siraj, here you go. I'll let you intro, and then I will toggle myself down, and then we will get Jeremy added back in here just shortly.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Simone, and thanks everyone to the Pelotonia team, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. Happy Wednesday. What's life without a little bit of technical difficulties right when you're trying to hit present? Really excited for our conversation today and this collaboration with Pelotonia. And we're excited to bring Jeremy Hunter, who comes from the Claremont Graduate School out in California and is a renowned expert in mindfulness and executive coaching, and has been all over the world talking about how individuals and businesses can manage change in uncertain times, which is certainly what we are living in right now. And so as long as we've got him with no technical difficulties, I'd like to send the stage over to Jeremy.
And Siraj, it looks like he's connecting, so just hold tight.
All right, all good, all good.
He just messaged us that he is lost in cyberspace, but it says accepted and connecting, so we'll...
Oh, there it is.
Oh,
okay,
there we go.
Great.
We found you,
Hi.
Jeremy. We found you.
We've got a great team here. Everyone is flexible and taking the punches. I appreciate it.
That's great.
I'm really proud of myself. My heart rate has not gone up at all. I've been watching it to see how it feels. So hopefully, Jeremy, I'm learning from some of our prep conversation that we've had, but I digress. And I will, Simone, if we want to give Jeremy the stage, you can pull me off.
Awesome.
All right, great. Hello there. Thank you. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon. I'm coming to you live from Los Angeles. So I have to say that the team has been absolutely a joy to work with, and so lucky to have them. I am going to try to share my screen. Maybe. If you see, in the meantime, in the chat box, I'll repost this. There's a little link. And if you want to click on that link, you don't have to register. You can just skip through the registration. But just see, there's this question there for you to answer. And I think that the technical difficulty gremlin has come to my part of the screen. I can't somehow share my screen. So let's see here. Okay, that's not what I wanted. This was all working just fine.
I know.
2 seconds ago.
It's Simone, so just take your time. I will see if I can troubleshoot on this end, but we had it so perfectly.
So let me see if I can put these. So I'm going to read out some of the words that are coming through the link. Anxious is the number one word, and claustrophobic, uncertain, frustrated, optimistic. Right. Uncertain. Let's see. Some of the words got chopped up. Determined, hopeful. Right, there we go. 20 results are coming in. Concerned, Duck feet? That's great. Sometimes I feel like that. I know my son, who's 4, often feels like duck feet. Let's see. My share screen isn't happening either yet. Wonder if it is. Tired and wired. That's great. So let me just talk to you about what I wanted to talk about. We don't need really to use the slides. The title of this program comes from a quote from a Haruki Murakami novel, The Storm Makes the Kafka on the Shore. And the quote is, "One thing is certain. When you come out of the storm, you won't be the same person who walked in," right? And that's what the storm is all about. Now, we've been in a storm for a while, and it looks like it's not going to go away anytime soon until there's really an effective vaccine. And so the question I like to ask is, how do we come out of the storm better on the other side, and stronger, having greater capacity, being able to be more patient, be wiser, be more loving, right? Be a more effective leader. And that's really at the heart of the work I do. And so I think when we're faced with crises, right, we basically have 3 options, right? The first option is to collapse, right, which isn't really an option. And then there's like the middle option, which is coping, which is kind of just keeping your head above water. Maybe that's what the duck feet are about. And then I think, which is okay, but that's kind of the middle range, and it's probably temporary. And so I think we only really have the last option we have is to transform ourselves, which I think is the only real option that we have when we're faced with intense change or challenge like this. And so how do you do that, right? And those are the skills I'd like to talk a little bit about today. And this comes from my own personal experience. I'm a native Ohioan, by the way, so it's been great to work with the RTRX team in Columbus. But when I was 20 years old and a sophomore in college, I with a terminal illness that had a 90% chance of mortality within 5 years. That was almost 30 years ago now. And I can remember my father and I walking out of the hospital, and I look up at him and I said, Dad, I think 90% is good news, because somebody's got to be in the 10%. And I decided there in the atrium of the Cleveland Clinic as we were walking out that I'm going to be in the 10%. At that time, I'm half Japanese, incidentally, and my great-grandfather was a sumo wrestler, and which my mother didn't mention until I was 40 for some reason, but it would have been great to know that a lot earlier. But in any case, I was an Asian studies major in college at Wittenberg University in Springfield, Ohio. And I went back to school, and I told my professor what was going on. And he still is, we're still friends, 30 years later. He said, don't worry. He goes, everything's going to be okay. And he reaches into his desk and he pulls out a book called The 3 Pillars of Zen by Philip Kapleau, which is the first book in English to teach Westerners how to do Zen. And what you have to know is that in Japan, Zen didn't come from California. Zen was really the warrior's practice. And it partially because it honed your mind to be clear in the face of mortal threat. And I thought, well, that would be a useful thing to know how to do. And at that time, in rural Ohio, enlightened Zen masters weren't that common. And so this book was really the only thing I had. And I used it every night. And it gave me the skills to manage my mind in the face of, being 20 years old, being surrounded by people who were having a great time in school. And I was like looking at my mortality. And then I also had to figure out a way to make a life for myself. And so that's what I kind of want to talk to you today. That ended up becoming my career. And so at some point that your capacity to manage what is going on inside you is really the fundamental platform we all need in any phase of life, but most especially when we're when we're facing kind of crisis and challenge, right? And that's really the platform we have to lead from. So what I'd like to talk to you about today are basically 3 principles for how do we manage our own experience and what do we do when we're in that kind of challenged realm? So I'm going to go back to the word cloud. Let me see if we can get it to work. Nope, it's not going to work. Okay, so I'm going to read off some of the words. The biggest word is anxious, and then the next biggest word is overwhelmed, and the next one, let's see, uncomfortable, frustrated, bummed. Somebody says, okay, this is opportunistic. Yeah, absolutely, right? I feel consumed, making it up as I go along, right? The world throws curveballs at you and making the best of it. Yeah, duck feet underneath the water. Okay, I got it, right? So we have a kind of range of experience, and that's been kind of in the last 4 months of doing these conversations with people all over the world. That's I think really where we're at. We're a state of uncertainty and anxiety, and then how do we manage that? How do we manage ourselves in that process, and let alone how do we manage and deal with the people in our lives? If you're in a leadership position, how do you deal with your team? How do you deal with your family? Let alone how do you deal with yourself? So I teach at the Peter F. Drucker Graduate School of Management, and you probably know that Peter Drucker was considered to be the founding father of the discipline of management. And he had this idea that you can't manage other people unless you manage yourself first. And then he had another idea, which was, that leadership is defined by results. So you have to manage yourself first, and we're also defined by the results we generate in the world. And that's more than just quarterly results, but it could be, the quality of the relationships we have. It could be the quality of your health. My son has just run into the room. Hi, you're going to say hi to everybody? There's like 1,000 people on the other side of the screen. Yeah. Okay. You want to say hi to them?
Hi.
Hi. Okay. So Papa's got to work. So we have to manage ourselves first, and we generate results, right? So, you can think about it like a figure eight, right? We have 2 games to play, right? There's the inner game, the game you have inside that you have to manage inside, right? The emotions that are happening, the biases, the assumptions, expectations, the reactions you have to situations. That's the inner game. And then on the other side, you have the outer game, right? Which is, what's going on in the world, the work you have to do. And we have to play both of these games well, and we have to do it in real time, right? How do we manage the forces inside ourselves, and how do we manage the forces outside ourselves? I have a client I work with a financial services firm and work with the partners in that firm. And one of my clients there was in a meeting. She is kind of a superstar in the firm, and she's also known for her hot temper, right? So, like, this is a kind of an archetypal example of managing both games well. She's in a meeting with a key client. Somebody in that meeting says something inflammatory, and there is this wave of anger that kind of rolls through the room, and including in my client. She looks over at her client, who is a key client for this firm, and she notices that he's starting to pick up his papers to get up to leave. If he leaves that room, her career goes with him, right? So she very quickly realizes that she has to, manage this situation. But first she had to manage herself. She notices the anger inside herself, and she puts her hands on the tabletop. And the tabletop gives her solidity and someplace to put her attention on, to allow the anger that she's experiencing to start to subside. But once that subsides, she shifts her attention outward and acknowledges what's going on in the room. And then she very deftly redirects their attention into a more positive direction. She looks over at her client, right? His papers are now back on the table, right? The situation's saved. That to me is like the perfect example of somebody who played both games well, right? And so the reason why this is so important is that most of the time, like 90% of the time, we don't really know what's going on inside ourselves, right? That we're operating a lot of time on automatic pilot, and that is affecting the choices that we perceive we have, the actions we take, and then the result we get. right? And so if I don't know what's going on inside me, right? I don't know that right now I'm really angry and that is shaping what I see as my choices, then how am I going to get a result that I actually want, right? And that's really at the heart of the work I do. So as I mentioned, we have 3 principles for how do we manage experience. And principle number 1 is to simply acknowledge, what are you experiencing, right? What are you experiencing right now, right? Acknowledge what you're experiencing. Suraj did a great job. Like, oh, I noticed my heart rate hadn't gone up at all in any of this, right? And I figured, we're going to roll with it, right? So even right now, what are you noticing? And one way to do that is you could ask yourself, like, what's happening in your body right now? Right? What's happening in your body? Is there tightness? Is there tension somewhere? Are you relaxed? Right? Some people like scrunch their shoulders or scrunch their lower back. A lot of men scrunch their lower back and then, end up with lower back pain, right? Some people clench their teeth or their toes, right? So, but just what's happening in your body? And then what are the emotions you're experiencing, right? And can you give words to those emotions? And the better able we are to give words to the emotion, right? It's like being able to read the dials on the dashboard to give a sense of like what's going on inside you. About only a third of people can tell you what feeling they're feeling at any given moment, right? And then what are the stories in your head, right? What are the stories you're using to narrate your own experience, right? So it's simply just like, as a friend of mine said, like, this is like checking your own dipstick, right? If you check your own dipstick, what's happening in your body? What are the emotions you're experiencing? What are the stories you're telling yourself? That's principle number 1. Then principle number 2 is learning how to accept what you're experiencing right now. How do you accept what you're experiencing inside? Like, okay, right now, I feel angry. I mean, I don't really feel angry. I'm just using this as an example, right? Oh, I notice I'm feeling really angry, or I'm feeling really anxious, or I know that I have to have this difficult conversation in 15 minutes, and I notice that I have some tension, right? Or as, so we're now in lockdown again in California, right? So as this rolls on, I feel, somebody said in the poll, I feel claustrophobic, right? Can you allow that feeling just to be there? And what happens is that when what we usually do is when we resist it, we don't like it, we fight it, we try to push it away, that amplifies the sense of struggle. So if you allow the experience to just be there, it can flow along, right? But our usual habit is to try to push it away or to pretend it's not there, right? Look, I'm a native Ohioan. I know what it's like. We just pretend there's nothing bad going on and you just smile through it, right? That's not necessarily a healthy option, actually, right? So I have a colleague. I was talking to a colleague whose husband is healthcare right at the beginning of this crisis, and he was feeling major anxiety about what was going to happen to the hospital. And she talked to him about this principle. And then the next day, she sent me a note. She's saying, "Oh wow!" She goes, "When he started to view his anxiety and its triggers as just as part of the process of moving forward, right? He found that he was able to bounce back quicker, and his habit was to try to push it away and deny that he was feeling this anxiety." Right. And she said, oh, in a weird way, it makes him feel calmer and more in control of emotions and while not letting them kind of control him. Right. And it was simply about just acknowledging and accepting, here's what he was experiencing. Right. And there's good research done at Carnegie Mellon that says exactly the same thing. Your capacity to accept what you're feeling or experiencing inside is what helps you keep it together. Right. And basically, human beings have 3 ways of managing the difficult experiences that they have. One is to push it away, right? Push it away and pretend it's not happening. The other is to give it to other people, right? You explode, you spill on others, right? Or you amplify it, or you catastrophize it. You look at the stock market, the red stock market return for that day, and then that little data bit begins this process of catastrophizing, okay, what's going to happen, right? So one thing I'd like to encourage you to do is let go of the assumption that suppressing emotions makes you strong, right? And in fact, it's exactly the opposite. right? That suppressing emotions makes you brittle, because it's like you've taken a pop bottle and you've shaken it, and now you're going to stick your thumb on the mouth of that bottle, and that takes a lot of energy, right? That takes a lot of energy, and so it creates a kind of fragility. And so if we suppress it, right, you're using a lot of extra energy to manage that process. If you accept it, allow it to be there, allow it to flow, no matter how uncomfortable it might be in the moment, that helps you, right? It's actually the healthier move. The other thing I'd encourage you to do is just to accept the fact that your emotions are going to go up and down, even within the length of a day, right? That you may wake up in a good mood, you see the news, you come back down, and you may go back up and down, and that's normal, right? So principle number 1, right? Acknowledge what you're experiencing. Principle number 2, accept what you're experiencing inside, right? This is not about accepting unfair, unjust situations outside you. It's simply about how do you manage what's going on in the inner game, right? And then principle number 3 is that attention needs somewhere good to go, right? That we will habitually focus on what's going wrong, right? That's just part of the human makeup, and that we need to intentionally shift attention to what is going well, right? So, for example, I lived 17 years with this illness that I talked about, and in that process, I had to learn how to see what was going well, what was actually good in my life, and that was really the solid place I could stand on to be, a 20-year-old thinking about how to make a life, and that's really what kind of creates energy to keep you moving forward. So attention needs somewhere good to go. And a friend of mine said, "Oh, I really feel like I had pulled myself into this cul-de-sac because I was so obsessed with what was going wrong, and that when I started to look at what was going well, what was actually good in my life, beautiful in my life, strong in my life, I could pull myself out, and my energy came back, and I started to feel more hopeful." So one question I have for you is, what are you giving your attention to, right? What do you give your attention to? And, that principle is really about, if you understand what you're giving your attention to, you start to understand what your life is about. What our quality of attention and our quality of life are intimately interlinked. And if we don't have an idea of what we're giving our attention to, what we're really doing is giving away our life, right? Because what you attend to is what your life is. With my students, I often ask them, how do they use social media? Like, how do they relate to the internet? And one of my students says, "Oh, before I get out of bed in the morning, I'm already, I spend a half an hour just flipping through stuff." And I realize that's like 3.5 hours a week that I've just kind of wasted. And is that what I really want to give my attention to? So a second question I'd ask is, like, how do you manage fear, right? And I think it's kind of boring to talk about stress, right? Everybody's stressed, right? So, but it's more interesting to talk about fear and how do you manage it, or does fear manage you, right? And I think that fear can be a motivator for action, but it also can be a wall for inaction. And it's important to understand what the role of fear is in daily life, right? What does fear do? I've stopped thinking about emotions as good emotions or bad emotions, and rather to think about emotions as they're a certain kind. What role do emotions play, right? That they're emotions that are there for your protection and survival, which in this way, fear is not a bad thing, but it can also be immobilizing, right? And then there are other emotions, like the emotions of connection and growth, and that we have to cultivate those as well. But if we start to understand the role that fear plays, the role that fear plays in our life is that it creates energy. It creates energy to fight and defend yourself. It creates energy to flee and escape an attacker. And then it also creates energy to freeze, because predators, don't like dead things. And so if you can pretend you're dead and allow the saber-toothed tiger to walk by, then you're good, right? And so we have this kind of legacy system of protection inside ourselves, but we're protecting against threats that we don't really face today, right? And so, you know, our threats are like, okay, can I pay my bills? Do I have my job? I have this jerky guy yelling at me, right? And then we have this tiny little microbe that's totally upending our civilization, and that our traditional fear responses don't necessarily help us. So when we talk about managing ourselves, right, what we're really talking about is learning how to manage a nervous system, and that's, you know, something that we don't really talk about in school. Now, I know that because you're associated with the Pelotonia world, right, then, you know, exercise is probably a big thing for you, and that is one absolutely effective way to manage a nervous system, right? But I think it's, and because we know that helps you build kind of nervous system resilience, right? So what I'd like to do is talk to you about, let me see if I can create a slide. Talk about how does your nervous system actually work. We have a kind of capacity in our nervous system that, so let's see, can you see this? I think about, like, we have 3 zones, okay? Like the green zone is when you're feeling good, right? And that's where you're more adaptable, right? You've got, you're relaxed, you feel confident, you feel patient, you're curious about others, you're adaptable, you're easy to be with, right? That's where we want to be, right? This is the place we want to lead from, or parent from, or, you know, partner from. And then there's the red zone, which is like you've gone in high alert, and that's the place. So the green zone is kind of ideal, right? And it's kind of the you that you put in your online dating profile, right? And so, and then, you know, after, let's say, a half a year of dating, maybe that you introduce them to the you that's in the red zone. Okay, sorry about that. The audio went off for some reason. Okay, I should be back. Yeah. So red zone is like attack or defend. Green zone is I'm adaptable and I can manage things well. And then black zone is I don't have energy, right? I don't want to get out of bed. And this is the place of shutdown. This is the place of burnout, right? This is like a sense of giving up, depression, disconnection, all of that, okay? So we have these 3 zones we kind of circulate to. None of them are inherently bad, right? None of them are inherently bad, because sometimes we do need to defend ourselves. Sometimes we do need to run out of the room. Sometimes we do need to check out. Sometimes we do need to, you know, somebody passes away and you move into the black zone because that's a place of mourning, and I wanna kind of lower energy to be able to kind of come to grips with what's just happened, right? All of these things are healthy. It's just you don't want to live in the extremes for too long, right? So hopefully that made sense. So think about when you're in the red zone or black zone, how does that influence the choices you perceive you have, right? If you're frustrated, angry, or impatient, right, how does that influence the choices you perceive you have in the moment and the action you take or the result you get, right? Versus if you're in the green zone, you feel calm or appreciative or joyful, right? Does something shift? Does something shift? Does something open up in a way that wasn't present before? Maybe, right? So then how do we manage those inner states, the inner game? One thing I think it's important to be aware of is like, what are your tells? Like, what are the signs you have for yourself that tell you what zone are you in? Are you in the red zone now? Are you in the black zone now? Or are you in the green zone? Like, how do you know that? Right? How do you know that? What does each one of those zones look like or sound like or feel like to you? Right? And somebody said earlier here, right? I grind my teeth, right? That's a great signal. Like, what are you saying? What are you hearing? Right? And to be really clear about that. If you don't know, the people who live with you or work with you know, and so you could just ask them. Now, on that note, right, how do you know what the tells are of the people around you? And in this phase that we're kind of going through, how often do you check in with one another, right? My wife and I check in with each other at least 2 or 3 times a day. Just how are we doing, right? Because we have this kind of roller coaster world we're living in. And so what are you doing for yourself? What are you doing for the people around you? And that might be that, and if that's not a comfortable space for you, I read in the paper, how bosses have been kind of previously reluctant to engage with their teams at an emotional level, but now finding that it's absolutely necessary to do so. And maybe you're there, right? So what does that look like? How are you doing? What's on your mind? What concerns do you have? Right? And how do you make that conversation the priority? Because I found in talking with leaders over the last few months that if you don't make that the priority, right, then people are not going to be willing to put in energy to being productive, right? Like, how do you make their well-being really the priority in terms of what you need to deal with? So let me shift gears to talk about, okay, what if you have been living in the red zone for the last 3 or 4 months? What do you do, right? How do you get out of it? And that's an important skill to know how to do. And that's something I'd like to do with you together right now. I'm going to send you a document when this is all done, but there's a practice that I teach every person I work with, which is called resourcing. Excuse me. And I'd like to share that with you. A resource is something that helps you feel good, strong, loved, safe in the world, right? There could be resources that are inside you. There could be resources that are outside you, right? So common resources are places you like to go, right? Could be a certain bike trail, right? It could be a certain place in nature, some special place you like to go. There could be special people in your lives, people who are supportive, figures for you, spouses, good friends, ministers, pets more than spouses, incidentally, I think I've noticed as a common pattern. Music you like, that you find soothing, something you like about yourself, ideals that are important to you, spiritual or religious imagery that is important to you. So let's take a minute and think about, like, what are 1 or 2 of your resources, right? Like, what are 1 or 2 of your resources? And if you want to type them in the chat, that's okay too. Right? Like, what's something that's good in your life? And try to be specific. Right? So I'm going to guide you through a process. So for some people, it's exercising. Other people, it's music, cooking, baking, gardening. So think about what that might be. Now pick one. And what are some, think about homemade meals. Perfect, thank you. Right? So pick one. Yeah, walking my dogs, beautiful. Pelotonia, yeah, absolutely. Reading. So in 20 years of doing this, everybody has always had a resource. And usually more than one. So it might be a park, should be national park you like going to. And what's interesting is that they're all will be very individual to you. Maybe specific experiences, specific memories of a special time in your life, or being with a special person. So pick one, right? And then think about bring to mind like one or two details about that resource. So if it's your pet, what is the experience like of being with your pet? Or if say it's snowboarding, is there a particular place you like to do that? What's the feeling of that like? We'll get into that in a minute. So now let's try something. It probably is easier for you to do this. Close your eyes and bring them. First of all, just notice what's happening in your body right now. Like, what are you experiencing right now? And then bring to mind the resource. Right? Put yourself there. Right? Put yourself there. So Michael says running, right? And the feeling of moving forward. Okay, beautiful. Right? So put yourself in that place. And if you were with the resource, right, what would you be seeing? And what would you be hearing? And what would you be feeling? Right? And then as you imagine that, notice what's happening in the body. Yeah, it's beautiful, Megan. Like hearing the rocking of boat on water and feeling calm. Yeah. So what's that experience like? So for each of you, right, just noticing, what is this experience like? And then as you do that, notice, does something happen to your breathing? Or the quality of what you're experiencing in the body? And notice, where in the body do you feel calm? Or do you feel a sense of connection or a sense of aliveness? And then let your attention rest in that space of calm or connectedness or aliveness. And then notice what happens when you do that. Right? What do you notice? And then if you want to go back to the chat box, let's see if I can do this. So if you go back up into the to the Poll EV link, right? Click on it and just say what are words or phrases you would use to describe what changed. Oh, thank you, Simone. So the words I'm seeing here: calm, relaxed, relaxed. Right. Felt ready, grounded, right? Content, peaceful, calmness, stillness, focused, ease, control, peace. Secure, ease. Relaxed is now the biggest word. Felt ready, control, right? Beautiful. Right? So compared to the words we saw earlier, right? Anxious, worried, and all of that, right? It shifted. And so all we had to do was shift attention to something that was good in your life, right? And it's not about avoiding, the difficulty, right? It's like, how do you create your energy for yourself in the face of difficulty, right? Which is what I had to do for myself. Like how in this whole process of living with this disease do you find the energy to keep moving forward, right? And these are all things that these are all things that you already have in your life, right? There's nothing that you had to do. You didn't have to, astrally project yourself to the Andromeda galaxy to find this. It was something that was already there and with you, right? That's the magic of it, I think. So it's helpful if you can make this kind of part of a regular habit, right? Because we so easily default into states of fear. And of course, watching the news habitually doesn't help that. But obviously have to stay informed. But also, how do you shift attention to focusing on what's going well, and that, I think, allows us to be of greater service to ourselves and others around us. So I'd like you to think about, like, what are one or two things you'd do differently because of this conversation, right? Like, what are a couple things you might do differently? We talked about what you give your attention to. We talked about focusing attention on what's going well. We talked about understanding red zone, green zone, black zone, and how do you know when you're in the red zone, green zone, black zone? How do you know if others around you are in the red zone, green zone, or black zone, right? We talked about acknowledging what's going on inside. We talked about allowing that experience to come and go, allowing it to flow. And that's what gives you a certain kind of adaptability, right? So, Suraj, I'm open for questions if you'd like, but happy to take questions in the time we have left.
Great. Thank you, Jeremy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, first off, I'm going to say it's not like Simone and I planned all the technical difficulties, but there's no more perfect presentation or conversation that we could have had around managing anxiety and fear and what we're giving attention to. So I chose to give attention to the fact that we finally got to bring you to the Pelotonia and RTRX's audiences versus the fact that we've had a myriad of technical difficulties to get us started. And so I want to invite folks to pop some questions if they have any into the question function. But I want to start real quickly, Jeremy, when you talked about bringing this to our daily lives, right? So it's easy when we're in this conversation with you, or we're using the Calm app, or we're focusing ourselves. But if we're in a meeting, or if we're in a situation like this where something's not working, what are tips to focus on your resources, or to get back into the zone that's most healthy and effective for you or for that individual, like when we're in real life, if you will?
Yeah. I think you just said it, right? It's focusing on what is working. You did it. You answered your own question in a way. It's like, okay, what is working? Well, the camera's working. The microphone works most of the time. We're going to go with that, right? And so, there's this scene out of Apollo 13 which I'm sure everyone's seen this movie, right? Where there's an explosion in the capsule, right? As these three men are going towards the moon. And it's an unprecedented situation. Human beings have never been in this situation. And how are they going to get these guys back? And somebody has the wherewithal to ask, well, what is working, right? What is working? Because if they panicked and focused on what's not working, then, the likelihood of them returning safely to their families was going to be pretty low. And so, that was such a unforgettable scene in that movie, which obviously based on real life, like what is working and what can I do with that? And then that gave them the solid platform to stand on to figure out how to build the equipment to get them back. And which, it's an American movie, so it hasn't happened happy ending. So, but that's what I would do. That's what I do all the time. Like, what is working? In my illness, I said, okay, I have this disease attacking my kidneys, but if I look at the rest of my body, right, everything else is kind of healthy. Sure. Right? I only have one thing wrong with me. So that was one way that I didn't kind of feel sorry for myself. Like I was mostly a healthy person that had one thing that was going wrong.
Right. So transitioning it a little bit to talk about like the role that this type of work plays, or, you talked about earlier, if you can't, and I think it was attributed to Peter Drucker, but you can't manage other people until you manage yourself, right? So this belief of, we live in this 24/7 hour world. There's really not, and I think this pandemic has proved to us, there's not really a work hours and non-work hours. Like our entire life is integrated, right? And we want to be healthy business leaders and civic leaders, but we also want to be healthy individuals. And so have you seen the impact that this work has had on organizations and institutions, or where can folks who are on this and who will see this, who have the ability to activate change within their companies, what can they do from a corporate standpoint for their employees and for their company?
Yeah, that's a great question. I had really the pleasure of watching all my organizational clients in this basically turn on a dime in terms of shifting over to work from home and total digital delivery of whatever it is that they're working with. And they're not small organizations, So and then in kind of checking in with them and talking with them about what's going on, their primary value was that, look, our work is based on our relationships. And if the relationship is good, then everything else is going to be a lot easier. And because they invested so much in making those relationships effective, right? Then when the ship needed to turn on a dime, it could do that. And so I would say, invest in your people, because, it's a kind of airport consulting firm billboard cliche, but, they are indeed your greatest resource. Right. And your capacity to be in an effective, healthy relationship is really, I think, the unsung hero in all of that, right? So I think that's one. Two is, the idea of managing attention has kind of taken on a greater clarity of why that's so important when all of life is kind of mushed together, right? You're schooling your children, you're trying to get your work done, your spouse is trying to get their work done, you're trying to put food on the table, and take care of all the household stuff and all of that at once, right? And so there is this boundarylessness that was already present in life, but now it's simply just become more extreme and accelerated. And so learning how to manage attention and understanding why am I paying attention to what I'm paying attention to right now, and is this where my attention needs to be?
Sure.
I think is a really helpful question to ask yourself. And then also knowing when to hit the off switch and turn it all off and check out. My wife and I made a deal that on weekends we would do no work, and that we would really, and then after a certain hour at night, we would do no work, because the capacity to do work is infinite.
Right.
And so to create those, to be really intentional about creating those boundaries. And that's what I've also seen healthy institutions doing, is to say, look, there's a limit, and that we are going to be, this is from the CEO directly. We are going to be clear about, you need to put boundaries about work in your life. And
Sure.
That's what's healthy. Yeah.
Sure.
There's a lot to talk about, but that's what comes to mind.
Yeah, no, thank you. So our last questions, I want to put you on the spot a little bit. Our friends at Pelotonia have built a new platform, My Pelotonia, that allows folks from around the world to set challenges that are most meaningful to them, athletic, non-athletic, and in lieu of what would have been Ride Weekend for this year. And so I'm going to ask you two questions. One, if someone wanted to create a mindfulness related challenge as part of their My Pelotonia challenges, and we've had folks who are saying they're going to bake, meals for friends, they're going to volunteer with Habitat for Humanity or Meals on Wheels, or they're going to go ride or run or golf. What, I guess, mindfulness goals or suggestions do you have for individuals that they could set as a challenge for themselves?
So this is for me, and a suggestion for everybody else.
Sure.
To be really aware of what you're eating.
Okay.
Like Kirk Christensen talked about, I'm also the cook in my family. And so let's just say learning how to bake when you're in a confined space for a long period of time wasn't really my best idea.
Sure.
So, the phenomena of what I call the Corona carbs is making itself felt, in my waistline really clearly, right? So July 1st, actually, my goal has been to get rid of the 10 pounds I've collected from all the cheesecake, brownie, cookie festival that has been this household since March. Yeah. So the flip side of that for me will be to walk for an hour. But I would encourage everybody to pay attention to what you're eating.
Okay.
Right? And why are you eating this right now?
And are there mindfulness related goals? Because for me, I used to meditate every morning, and then March hit and I was like, oh, well, I'm at home every day, so what does it really matter? That thought process, I'm not sure how that really makes sense. But is it, how can people... So
from a meditative point of view, you're asking?
Yeah, from a mindfulness, meditative standpoint.
Yeah, well, first, I think awareness of what you're eating is actually a really great meditation practice, especially now. But also, paying attention to what's happening in your body. Right. And maybe even if that's just for a minute.
Sure.
What do you actually feel? Right. And then see what you learn from that.
Awesome.
That would be my suggestion. And do it a minute a day. Right.
Sure.
That's enough.
Spend a minute a day just focusing what you're feeling and where your attention's going.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Jeremy, thank you for joining us from California, for the cameo from your son very quickly. We look forward to having you here in Ohio soon. We'll share some cream puffs, maybe put some of those Corona carbs back on. We'll put them back on just for the cream puffs from German Village. I want to thank everyone who joined our conversation today and who stayed with us and gave us a little bit of grace as we work through some technical difficulties, and to our friends at Pelotonia for partnering with us. And so just want to say thank you, and I hope everyone has a great rest of your week.
Yeah.
Have a good
Thanks,
one.
everyone. Thanks, guys.